All right, everybody, welcome back to the Mindful Hunter podcast. I'm your host, as always, Jay Nickel. Super excited for this episode. Got the lads, Jordon and Ryan, on from BC backcountry, and they probably don't even realize this, but I think the two main inspirations for me originally starting Mindful Hunter was kind of actually these guys and watching Remy Warren's Solo Hunter. And there's a couple reasons for that. I liked what they were doing on Instagram. And this goes way back. I think I've been following you guys probably since 2016 or something. And we'll get into their background, but essentially Jordon and Ryan are BC residents who spend the vast majority of their time hunting in BC. And I would say they're kind of known for both elk and mule deer and kind of their ability to be routinely successful and take high quality animals out of areas that are difficult to hunt. And so I'd say you guys are one of the most, I don't want to say most anticipated episodes. I kind of fault myself. I'm surprised I haven't asked you to come on before, but as soon as I posted that you guys were coming on, people got legitimately excited. Oh, this is sick. Kind of like the coming together of two worlds and BC hunting. Yeah. So anyways, I'm super excited to have you guys on. And I know we're kind of right in the middle of hunting season, and it took a bit of finagling to get this to happen. So just first out of the gate, thank you very much for making the time, and I really appreciate you guys coming on the show.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Thanks for having us, for sure, too.
Yeah, no, I think it's gonna be fun. I was excited when you reached out, and it's kind of perfect timing. We just finished a bow hunt for elk, and we're literally one day away from heading out for our next rifle hunt for elk. So yeah, I mean, all senses and all focused on hunting right now anyways. Yeah. So
I leave in 10 hours for the rifle hunt. So.
I'm jealous. I got one hunt left this year, and it's going to be a late season mule deer, and it's not until the last week of October. So I'm kind of trying to distract myself with gear reviews and other shit, so I can pretend I'm doing.
Hey, those are always good too, right?
Yeah. Okay, so let's dive into some histories, because I'm kind of curious what your guys' backgrounds are. So maybe Jordon, we'll start with you, and maybe it makes more sense to give them together. I don't even know, but let's just start with a little bit of a background. How did you initially get into hunting?
So yeah, hunting has been part of my life since I was a kid. Lucky enough to have a dad growing up that was, avid outdoorsman, canoed, boated, kayaked, hiked, cross-country skied, hunted, did backpacking trips, had done horseback trips, had done all that stuff, less focused on any one of those individual things, but generally was doing outdoor things pretty much his whole life growing up. He grew up in the Kootenays, moved to Kamloops. His background was mostly fishing small rivers and stuff like that, and that turned into kind of transitioned into upland game bird hunting, which then led to duck hunting, where he kind of met more and more people that were into big game hunting. So when I was, young age, we did a lot of ducks, a lot of grouse. We had hunting dogs, pointers and stuff that we did the bird hunting with. And then I was just drawn more to big game hunting. So my dad kind of set it all up and started taking me and my brother hunting on a regular basis, as, not as a have to fill the freezer. It's just a job. You got to do the quickest thing, but more as a hobby and a sport and enjoyment, as well as filling the freezer. But yeah, then my passion for deer hunting just kind of skyrocketed right away. And so I ended up kind of pushing my dad more into deer hunting. We did less and less upland bird hunting and duck hunting. And then from there, we kind of, I met Ryan, I think probably grade 8 or 9 in high school. Yeah. He had killed a big deer, and I had a big passion for big deer. So never killed a big one myself, but, so we became friends in high school and started, talking shop about hunting and stuff like that, and got really connected on that. And then, yeah, eventually we transitioned into kind of more than just deer hunting, elk hunting, and chasing sheep and goats and other stuff like that. So that was kind of my background. And, growing up in BC, it was, a lot of back in the day of just, truck hunting, covering ground, hitting clear cuts, first light, last light, a little walkabout here and there where, you walk a stretch of timber between a couple cuts, or you kind of hit a bench somewhere, and that was close to kind of, easy access. And then, as I got older, we kind of transformed into, start the day on the feet and end the day on the feet. And the truck was just to get to the place you want to hunt, kind of thing, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And how about yourself, Ryan? What's your background?
My background's similar to Jordan's. I didn't do as much like bird hunting or grouse hunting. It was strictly fishing for the most part with my mom's boyfriend and my dad. And once we got a little older, I started, getting into deer hunting. Well, at an earlier age, at around 10, I started deer hunting and ended up taking the big buck Jordan saw when I was 12 years old. Actually, it was quite a big deer, and we ended up meeting like a year after that. I showed him the pictures. We started getting into the, oh man, we should start hunting. We should start planning these trips together.
Yeah.
So as we got older throughout high school, we could start to drive, and we were able to go on our own little hunting trips. And yeah, we started planning trips all across BC. And one of our mutual friends actually got a cow tag down in the East Kootenays.
Okay.
And that's kind of what got us to the elk hunting. And so we went down there, didn't have much success, but just like George said, cruising from A to B on the quad, and came around a corner and saw a massive 4-point mule deer. I took a shot at it and missed, actually. I was all bummed out and tried to catch up to him by coming around like kind of where he ran down a draw. And right when I went around the corner into this thick, like almost moosey area, but we were in the Kootenays. It was just little Christmas trees / like a little meadow, and sure enough, big, which looking back was probably a 6-point elk walked out. And that was the first time I'd ever seen a bull elk. And I was like, oh my God, this is what we got to do.
Yeah.
Like, we got to get into more of this. So that was the kind of the start of the elk hunting. And ever since then, yeah, we've been going hard on elk. And as you can see, Jordan's like still pursued mule deer, where I've kind of fallen off. Like, it's just all or elk or nothing for me at this point. But
that was a big transition point for us when we were like really keen on deer. We're doing alpine deer hunts, we're doing backpack deer hunts, we're doing rut deer hunts. And then Ryan comes back. I had a sheep draw that year, so I was chasing sheep. And Ryan comes back and he just says, Jordan, like, man, elk's where it's at, man. Like, I missed this like 28-inch massive 4-point. He's like, gonna come around the corner, and you just remember him explaining to it. He's just like so pumped, right? Yeah, big horns, and just crosses the road in front of him. When you're not an elk hunter and you see something like that walking in front of you, and it's just like, you can't even count points. You don't even know what you're allowed to shoot or not. And you're just like, your brain's spinning. You're a young hunter, just like experiencing a, once in a lifetime kind of experience, right? So that was just like opening up the regs, looking what's open, where it's open, when the season is. Didn't know anything about the rut, didn't know anything about elk. It was just like, okay, let's go here. Let's do this and make an annual trip about it, kind of thing.
So and give me some chronology here. What year would that have been, and how old were you guys been then, and how old are you guys now? So how long has that been kind of going on?
Yeah, so I think I think it was 05, 06. So we would have graduated in 04, 05.
04,
yeah. So we were around 17, 18, 19.
Yeah.
And he would have went on his
like
first.
A good 15 years.
Yeah.
Okay.
The first years were hard, right? Like, it was, taking mule deer strategies and what you knew about elk hunting that you learned from, I think we were Primos videos.
Yeah.
So we would buy the call and it'd have like a disc or whatever, DVD player disc, and you'd watch the video over and over, and started by practicing calls, and in these videos it's just like there's 6 guys calling on some ranch somewhere.
Yeah.
Elk comes running in
everywhere.
Yeah. And there's 100 callers behind the guy, cow calls, bull calls, this and that, and the guy's got a bow and he's 5 yards away, and you learn through that, and quickly in the forest you kind of realize that wasn't really the way to kill an elk necessarily in BC, by having 16 calls going nonstop and pushing elk out of the country. But that evolved to us learning that, like, holy crap, we got to learn how to count points. So we'd be watching videos just like quickly identifying a 5 and a 6 and getting quick at like counting brows, the third, the sword, and looking for the whale tail kind of thing. So we did do a lot of research off that, and that's what was available back in those days, right? That was like pre-social
media. There was nothing, man. If you look at what's available now between like Elk 101 and the stuff that Dan puts out, and like it's almost too much, but there's almost an infinite amount of hunting, and especially elk hunting has got to be the single most popular form of hunting.
For sure.
If you go to like hours uploaded on YouTube, elk's got to take number one. And I think it's just because it's so exciting. Like a lot of other hunts, and I film my own hunts, and sometimes it's like there's not a whole lot going on. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know how to make this exciting. Like, I'm just sitting here glassing. Elk hunting's not like that. There's always action. There's always shit going on. And I think that's part of the bug. Like, I love my glassing hunts. Just came home from a sheep hunt. Love hunting. alpine mule deer. One of my favorite hunts in the world is coos deer hunting down in Arizona. Like, but there is nothing like that elk in the rut, like the adrenaline rush and like getting a bugle back. Like that's the other thing that you can't really compare, that talking component, that interacting where like I yell at you, you're yelling back at me. Like there's just nothing else. There's nothing else like that.
No, for sure. Adrenaline pumps and your heart just gets going and you're just, it's just kind of this cascading butterfly effect after that, right? Of like, does it go quiet? Do you close the gap? Does, just takes you on a wild trip after that, right? So it's, and it's kind of like becomes that precursor to like the big main event, right? Just getting a bugle back. It's like, oh, that's a thing, right? And you can say that about other hunting where you spot something that's really important, but it doesn't always necessarily lead to a legal animal or a possible kill that you can actually make. But bugles, normally it's like, this is a really high probability situation. This is like the main event. It's like, you get that going and your whole hunt could be made from that one bugle you get back, right?
Well, and getting a bugle back was almost an event in itself. Like it was, I got a bugle back years before I finally actually killed my first elk. And that almost felt like a milestone in itself. Like, oh, holy shit, I made a sound and then it decided to make a sound back. And it's like, that's a very exciting thing the first time that happens.
Yeah. No, it's a pretty crazy experience. I mean, just even like that, hours spent and amount of bugles you've projected into a mountainside, into a valley, into a slide, and like got nothing back. And then all of a sudden you get one, right? And then next hunt you get a couple. And it's like, I remember when you first went out, Ryan was way better at calling than me. He could produce a really good bugle and he wasn't even half as good as he is now, but like he would get bugles back very infrequently, one in like 4 or 5 days, and you're out there for 2 weeks. And so you made
tough area
though, for sure. Yeah. Low population area, like
low population bulls. But...
And back then, I would hike on my own and we'd be looking for elk. So we'd split up and, I would put so many calls in that forest, and I was using a power bugle. Didn't like the Primos calls. I couldn't make them work very well. I couldn't make a mouth read work. And Ryan had those things kind of dialed. And, I was probably my second or third year bugling before I got my first call back. And then it starts to build off that, right? It's like every one experience, I did that right. And all of a sudden you can kind of replicate that more and more until it turns into a thing, right?
Mm-hmm. Now, one of the things I'd like to dig into, I don't think most people understand the density of the vegetation in BC, particularly where you boys are.
No.
I still don't think there's any videos, like nobody's putting out material on how to hunt country like that. So how were you able to take the limited access to information that you had, and what kind of a learning curve was that when you were like, oh shit, like we are not on a Parkland, Montana ranch, like we're in the fucking NAR, like
super good question, super relevant for anybody hunting in BC. Like there's actually not a lot of elk country in BC that isn't mixed with some really dense forest and dense foliage.
Shitty slides.
And even, and like some of that content that's around, like it'll preach, look for this open stuff, look for this and catch them on this stuff. And it's like, elk in BC don't even need to hit that stuff. Like they really don't have to hit it. Like elk can live in the timber. And I was on a bull in the bow season that literally was feeding for 45 minutes while I, proceeded to try and get him within draw range and get a clean shot of his vitals. I never ended up pulling the trigger on him, but he was just eating in a thick forest. But there's just so much rain and the canopy allows enough sunlight in that there's food across that valley or across that kind of slope, even though it's fully treed, right? But you don't have to, not every bull, not every cow is going to end up in a big open slide or on a nice open grassy knob or shooter or cut or something like that. Like some of those elk can live for weeks in the timber without ever showing any bit of hide or tide or something like that, right?
Half the problem with a lot of those big bulls we encounter is they pull you into that. They might be in that nice spot, but then they take control of the calling and they'll literally pull us into that thick brush where it's like, we're now at a point where it's like, if we get a shot at this thing, it's going to be 8 yards away from us.
Right? Yeah.
It's those smart bulls. They'll pull you right across all those spots where they don't feel comfortable and they'll bring you like right into their bedroom, essentially. And just say like, if you want to come at me, you come at me, but I'm going to see you from 5 yards away from you by the time you bust through that willow or that thicket.
I think that's probably where like a lot of the content isn't super relative. I mean, we do setups, we try setups and the odd one works. But a lot of like setups, the bull just moves off. And so we tend to like put a lot of pressure on the bull. We try to do a setup if we see a setup that's possible. Oh, there's a trail. Oh, there's an opening. Oh, there's this. We'll try to do a setup, but it's rare that the bull just decides that
do what you're thinking.
I'm coming right into the setup just the way they want me to, right? A lot of the time, terrain kind of trumps the setup. It's like if it's steep, elk aren't coming down to you very easy. You're pushing into them the whole time. So the wind may be down in the morning or in the evening, and you're coming up from below, and you're thinking this bull, traditionally an elk's going to want to circle you and get the wind, but an elk, from our experience,
They just keep going.
they will take steep over wind every time. So they won't sacrifice the high ground to go get your wind. They are going to stay above you. They'd rather wait to see you. So they can hear you, you're an elk. They just want to see that you're an elk. And so you're going to push them. And we normally just try to get to that point where it's super close. And the next 10 yards of willows is going to be us and the elk. And then we're like shooter, caller. And caller tries to drop back 5, 10, 15 yards, just enough to try and give this bull enough to come in. But a lot of times you pull back that 5, 10 yards with the shooter just in front of you. And that's enough for the bull just to walk 50 yards higher up the mountain.
Right.
And then you just reset and you push in tight again and you cover 100 yards. And all of a sudden you're back screaming head to head and you just try to do that setup again. And the way I kind of look at it now is you're going to push a bull until he finally gets so pissed off, he will charge in to 10 yards away and give you a shot, or you push a bull into open country. There's a little avalanche slide, there's a little meadow, there's a little shooting lane here, and you'll push that bull, or a bull makes a mistake, crosses a gully and pops up the other side, and you get a clear shot at him going through, right? So almost like you're trying to just challenge that bull to come in, which is, kind of the traditional setup thing. And so we keep trying to do that setup and resetting as we keep closing the gap and getting intense. And then the bull kind of steps away and backs off again until you either push that bull into an opening or until it tries to cross a gully or, ends up in a little meadow or the side of an avalanche chute where there's a shooting lane and you can see 6 points and you can make it all happen, right?
I have always wondered if the lower density population in British Columbia actually affects elk behavior, because I've been in high elk population states and I've had different experiences, and I've had the exact experiences you got, like and not even, I don't want to say call shy, because they will call, but they won't engage. Like you can't get them to come into you.
Yeah.
And it's like, I've been in other places and I almost feel like, especially with higher like bull to cow ratios and more satellite bulls, they feel the need to be more aggressive because they're worried about somebody taking their cows, where I feel like possibly, and maybe this is just a theory I've got, because the lower elk densities in British Columbia, they're more like they play a more defensive game as opposed to like a more offensive game like you would get in an area with a higher elk population.
I think that's fairly accurate. We've hunted low population and not quite as low population, if you want to put it that way, in BC, right?
Right.
We're not talking Colorado or Montana here, where there's twice as many elk in an area, a quarter the size, right? So definitely we can see that even on like places we've hunted, 3 or 4 different locations in BC. And the places that are low population, elk are way more defensive. Like the lowest population areas, they're very defensive. They have cows, they really don't want to muck around, right?
Yeah.
And so those ones are a little more challenging. And in areas like that, it's been kind of more of a persistence thing where you work this herd day in, day out until, you make a mistake or a satellite bull comes in that is very aggressive because it's a satellite bull trying to get into the cows. And then that ends up being your 6 point that you get. But yeah, those lower population areas, it's more about just persistence and working it over and over until that one, you catch the bull in a bad spot and he has no choice but to challenge you, or you close the gap close enough. But those are low odd plays for sure, right?
And how difficult or challenging do you guys find the 6 point limit? Like, how often is it you play and you finally get a shot and it's like only 5, or how much does that play into the actual?
A lot, yeah. We probably twice as many bulls dead for sure if it was any bull or 5 point even, right? Like generally there's a lot of satellite 5 points. There's a lot of even mature 5 points that are running around without the 6th, right? And you make a play maybe 2 or 3 times on that bull and you finally get a look at it and it's a 5 point. You're like, there goes a morning hunt, an evening hunt, another morning hunt, and it was on a 5 point, right?
And typically you get a look at that 5 point because it is a 5 point, right? Like he comes like those ones that are like perfect. It's like, oh, he's coming right in, and it's like, oh, but it's a 5 point.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, we're in 6 point season, so.
Yeah, that's I've always been interested in that conversation, and we don't got to kind of deep dive into regs now, but I've always, as a bit of a thought experiment, always wondered if we, just because all the other places I hunt tend to manage elk differently, and they tend to manage elk very successfully that way. And I'm all about responsible management, and I want mature animals running around, and I'm even willing to sacrifice some opportunity in order to kind of facilitate that. But that's been that's always, for instance, like I like to go up into 750 when I can, because they've also got that first 3 weeks where you can catch a 3 point, and that kind of takes a bit of a pressure off as well, because it's like I'm not looking to kill a 3 point, but it's like kind of more that kind of semi-mature 5 point. As long as I see a good elk, I know I'm going to be able to take the shot, and that opens up more opportunity.
That's our approach in bow. Like that's literally our approach in bow. Yeah. We don't go to bow trying to do spike 2-point, 3-point setups.
Yes.
We'll take one if it sets itself up, and you're not going to say no to meat when there's obviously a bigger camp around us these days, and there's eggs to go around. So meat and freezer counts for a lot of our hunt, especially with elk. But I mean, our approach is still the same. We still hunt as if we're looking for mature bull. Yep. That's the way we move. That's the way we call. That's the way we grind. We're looking for a mature bull. But the beauty is when a 5 point comes in with the bow, that is a legal bull, and you don't need to look and count. You just see a good rack coming in, and it's just look for a shot. Don't even look at the horns, right? You're trying to keep your composure and make it happen, right?
Lots of times you're even a chance to see the horns too, and not thick stuff. Yeah. You literally see a couple points. You're like, oh,
yeah. And that's the other thing that's kind of frustrating about that 6 point limitation. Like if we were in a more open country area, I would almost have less issue with it, because you could really ascertain, the amount of points from a further distance and still have somewhat of an opportunity. But props to you guys too, because it's like that is an extremely difficult thing to do that close with that much adrenaline pumping, and like do it in a responsible way. And I'm sure there's been some 6 points that got away because you had to take an extra second to make sure the point was there, and that was the extra second you didn't have.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I'd say there's something to be said just for, I don't know what you want to call it, just kind of those few seconds leading up to pulling the trigger, like just kind of that killer instinct where you are just using every second available to your advantage. And, happened to us, on our first bull together, and it was our second bull our camp had got, and our first time bugling in a 6 point basically. But, bulls visible to Ryan can't count 6 points, and he's gone up on it, and I can't even see horns. And we're literally standing 2 to 3 feet apart. And this bull charges in at, 10 yards from us, and we just cannot see things. And as the bull steps out, all of a sudden I'm gun up, and Ryan all of a sudden has already dropped his gun because he has no shot anymore, but he can clearly see 6 points, and he's just like 6 point shoot, right? Yeah. But just like that's where the two people definitely helps. But just even other experiences where, if you know bulls in the area, it's like you're taking off scope caps, you're priming your gun, you're taking every intermittent second between like the bull closing the gap and you making final calls, and you've got, your bugle in front of you, your gun's laid out, and like I've killed a bull like that. My biggest bull was a bull that never bugled once, and I closed the gap only because my brother pushed on Google Earth and said, where we spotted this bull is like it's just a little grassy knob. It's only 20 yards above us, but we're standing in an alder that's way overhead, screaming, right before dusk, and there's no bulls bugling. But we closed that last little gap just to get to that point where, this is right where we saw that bull this morning. And sure enough, we get out in the open, there's a cow staring at us that's been obviously hearing our bugles and is very interested in heat, very estrus, ready to go. And I just scream at the cow. And as I'm doing that, I'm pulling my gun off my shoulder. I put it on the ground and nothing happens, but the cow's still interested. I scream again. And as that's happening, I'm literally, jacking a shell into my gun slowly. And then I just, not even a bugle, but I hear this grunt in the forest. And it's just like, obviously it's a bull. And just just kind of lets one of those out.
Yeah.
And then I kind of hear branches breaking at that point, scope or my Bino harness is open. I've got binoculars hanging off my head. I've got my, literally gun sitting there loaded, scope caps off. And so this bull pops out just across the slide, 80 yards from us. And it's just comes out. And of course I can see 5 point on the one side, and then behind the sword point on the other side, I can tell there's something there, but I don't know if it's a fork or not. And the fact was my brother's right there with me, but doesn't hunt elk as much as I do, and like it was kind of a second elk hunt, so he didn't know what to look for and wasn't comfortable making a call. But he comes out, grabs his cow, and then as he turns to walk back into the timber, I see that 6 point. It was just like, it was, you're grabbing the gun, you're up, and your trigger on, and away you go, right? And it's like, if I was still jacking shells in, that bull's gone. He's not bugling. He's not coming back out. Dark in 15 minutes, right? And it's like, if you weren't taking those few little steps of like queuing up, getting ready for that final moment, it's just like, it's just a story at the end of the day, right? Like, oh, we had this cool encounter. We think it was a 6 pointer. We saw a 6 point, but it's too late to get a shot off, right? But I shot him 2 yards from the timber, basically last couple steps before he disappeared, right?
So for this type of hunting, what scopes do you guys tend to use? I'm more concerned about the actual like magnification range. And then what magnification would you usually have it on when you're in like one of these timber hunting situations?
So I use the wrong scope for sure. I'm a bit of a believer in some of like the, just carrying gear that will, offer opportunities, over the years and the miles that you put on. It's nice to have gear with you that can make opportunities happen. So I do some long range shooting. I do home loading, and so I've got a 5.5 to 20, I think, or 22. And so I have that thing dialed on 5.5. I don't dial it up unless I'm trying to get a count on points or I am doing a longer range shot. Yep. But it's like, it's 5.5. I would prefer to have 3 at that point, right?
Yeah.
But
I actually used to have a 2.5 to 10, and I've traded in since for a 4x16, but I almost wish I had that 2.5.
Yeah.
I built a blacktail gun. It was just a Tika 308, and that's exactly what I put on it, was a 2.5 to 10. Because where I'm hunting blacktail is like extremely, not quite as dense in vegetation, but you're still like sub 50, sub 75. I've never killed a blacktail over 100 yards away. I probably never killed one over 70 yards away. So it was the same deal. I was looking for maximum field of view, and for that particular situation, I think the 2.5 to 3.
It's the way to go, right? It's the way to go. If I had my choice, that's probably what I should be using. But you just what elk country's like, and it's like, how often could an elk step out on a slide at 400 meters?
We still have made 350 yard shots. Like we still every once in a while have those long range shots or longer range shots, and you do like that extra magnification for sure.
I'd say I've killed one bull with my gun using more than 5.5, and that was, I think, 2 years ago, and that was at like 280 meters, and it was super nice to have. Ryan's killed a goat and one bull around 300. Every other deer that I've killed recently and every other elk I've killed recently is on the lowest power setting. Don't touch it. I'm just up. I already know what it is, and I'm pulling the trigger, right?
Yeah, very similar experience for myself. I want to take a bit of a left turn because I think the conversation about mature animals begs a little bit more discussion, and then we're going to get back to the elk thing, because something's happened recently this sheep season that's a little disconcerting. So recently there were 7 immature rams, and not even necessarily, some were confiscated because of lack of meat. Some were confiscated because debates regarding full curl. Some were clearly immature. I don't think it's solely an issue of hunter error. I do think there are some gray areas in our regulations that could probably use some work around some of the wording. Nathan French has put out some really interesting stuff lately that I think.
I've been following all his posts, right? They're
and some people give him some heat, and I'm like, I had a really interesting podcast with Clay Lancaster, and he's the same way. He's like, the way they're written, it's just like, they just don't have to be written that way. Like, you could still achieve the same goal and give more clarity. But 2 questions for you guys. One, what are your thoughts on just, that general issue? And it's clear because I see the animals you guys take down, and you're on social media. So this whole, I'm pressured because I'm on social media, I think is kind of bullshit. And I'll give my own 2 cents on that afterwards. But what do you guys think about the general issue? And how do we talk to these guys who are coming up, who feel like, I got to kill something because there's a pressure on me to kill something, so I'm maybe killing shit I shouldn't kill?
I think there is, I will admit, there's a lot of pressure on you, but if you are to make a mistake, you're going to regret it way more than doing something that, you shouldn't have done. Like, at the end of the day, that's the biggest thing to always keep in mind. There's been a lot of times where I've been with Jordon and been by myself, and there probably was a 6 point on an elk or very close. But I let it walk and felt way better knowing that I let it walk rather than pulling the trigger and walking up to it, a 5 point, being like, oh.
So what's that conversation like with yourself when you're in that situation? Because obviously that kind of lust kicks in and you're like, I want to take this.
Yeah,
But what does
yeah.
that conversation sound like that results in you making the right call?
It's hard to pinpoint an exact one. It's more just like, you know what? I know at the end of the day, I'm making the right call if I can't guarantee it's the right call. So like I can sleep at night with that by myself and I'm okay with that. I'm okay to potentially let a 6-point walk away and not have to have that guilt of shooting, you know, an illegal animal. So
I think that comes with also feeling like you don't. I know I'm finally at the point in my hunting career, and this has only happened in the last couple of years, where I don't feel like I have to prove myself anymore.
Yeah, I think that's a huge part, right? That's a huge part. I think what we're, you know, a lot of that, where that could fall is in that earlier years hunting or new animal being hunted and
or you're trying to
time
build
spent. And, you know, I watch guys that can play sports that just like, you know, I spend too much money to be crappy at the sport. I spend too much time to not be better at this, right? And it's like in hunting, you cannot have that approach where, you know, spend so much time, you just got to be better, right? It's like, but I find it comes with appreciation, right? You stop caring about the kill so much and you start just like, your expectations are way more level set, right? Go hunt in BC for 10 years and your expectations are going to be very realistic and you still get excited. You still have dreams of grandeur that we're going to kill this, we're going to get that, we're going to load up, we're going to see the big one. It's like, but you know, when you hit the dirt, you know, let's be realistic. That's not what's going to happen necessarily, right? And so your expectations are a lot more level and realistic. But for those new hunters, expectations become built a lot off of social media for sure. So there's a lot of that pressure, there's a lot of that excitement, there's a lot of that kind of heroism and stuff like that. But that's very much an experience, right? I mean, I don't think people get that when they've hunted for 5 or 10 years, right? I don't think that mentality comes out very much anymore, right? It's you know what you're there to do, you know what you're likely coming home empty-handed, but if not, it's great, right?
Yeah. I think too, one of the big realizations I have is because I like to make hunt films and I like to share my stories. And I know that a hunt film with a dead animal and an Instagram picture with the rack gets way more engagement than without. But I also had this realization because I went and did a couple like real ball buster hunts and like came home empty handed. And it's like people were super into them.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, so like I realized as long as I go on a hunt that's really challenging for me and I capture that story, I've kind of given up. I'm agnostic of I'm not agnostic of the outcome. I want to kill something. Like that's why I get up in the morning on a hunt 100%. But I also feel very comfortable and confident these days that if I bring back a story about challenge and struggle, even if I failed at the end, like I almost get more respect for, like I just posted my sheep hunt and I guarantee that was my first legitimate sheep hunt. And I guarantee, and I didn't kill a sheep. And I guarantee if I did kill a sheep, I would have taken a bit of flack because like, oh, it's your first year, you were lucky, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
But like even on Hunting BC, which is known as like not the like nicest forum in the world, like every single dude was like respectful and like you busted your ass, it'll happen. You just got to keep grinding. And it was like, all I did was tell the story of a struggle. And it's like, I guess that's the kind of thing I'm trying to impart to like some of the people who haven't been hunting for as long. Like just tell the story of what actually happens out there. That's enough for people. You don't have to like embellish it or take a shot you shouldn't take, because that's the other thing. And it's not an immature animal, but taking shots with like low likelihood, like once you put a bullet in an animal and you can't find it, and that terrible, because that's the other thing that experience brings, that really makes you think, take a beat before pulling the trigger, because that's one of the most horrible feelings I've ever had. And luckily I've never not recovered an animal, but there have been hours where I thought I wasn't going to recover an animal. And that's the other situation where I think a newer hunter, they're shaking, there's the animal, and they just, punch the trigger. And it's like, I think the longer we do this, the less likely we are to do that. It's like nowadays, if I don't have like a really good shot, then I'm like, I'm not taking a shot, because I'm like, I don't want to feel that feeling because it's terrible.
No, for sure. So that's just, again, it takes one experience of almost not recovering. And, that starts to ring in your brain, right? It's in the back of your head about taking, offhand, crappy angle, low watch shots, like you say, like, and I've had a buck that, should have been dead in its bed and literally just had a frangible bullet. It was a burger bullet up close, hit a shoulder blade, or actually shoulder bone. It was actually just the leg bone, and exploded. It was like a bucket of chips afterwards. And so I thought this was a dead deer, went up to go, gave it 20 minutes, went up to go find it, and it was bouncing off. And 6 hours tracking a deer from the snow line into the mud, into, you know, deer country where there's very little trails and you don't even know if you're on a fresh track or not, and ended up killing that deer in its bed, you know, probably almost a kilometer and a half later, and one journey like that, and every elk we've shot. And now I walk in thinking we're not gonna get this elk, right? I felt great in the shot, everything's great, but like I walk in there not like storming through the bush, where is it? I walk in there, okay, what side should we come in from? Where could you go? What's gonna give him an angle to escape if he is only wounded? And then, you know, you spend 2 hours hiking on an elk that's dead 40 yards from your shot.
Yeah.
Right. But we've had that opportunity now where it's like you walk in and they're dead every time, but it's like you always go in with that mindset. But that mindset's there when you're pulling the trigger, that like you don't pull till it feels right. You don't pull till everything's lining up and clicking together. I mean, it's easy to say that too behind a, you know, a webcam and a keyboard too, right? There's obviously those times where this is the shot you're gonna get, and you can't always wait. Thick bush, chasing a big meal there, right? The shots are quick, they're fast. You second guess yourself afterwards, but I think, you know, the amount of times you pulled the trigger starts to build up, and your brain, mind will tell you when not to shoot, right?
100%. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about strategy. One of my breakthrough moments for me, and this is more like backpack elk hunting in more like the States, but one of the big unlocks for me was when I discovered bivvy hunting, because I used to like go in deep, lock myself into an area for 10 days. If there were elk there, maybe I'd have some action. If there weren't elk there, it didn't matter. It was just like I had decided that was the area where I was going to hunt, so I hunted there. And then when I discovered bivvy hunting, that changed the game for me. Because then I realized I only go in for 3 or 4 days at a time. If there's no elk there, I go to the truck, I drive up the road, I go in a different spot. And if there is elk there, I just go back to the truck, I get more food, and I come back in. But I know that's not the way you guys hunt, and I would be, and I like, and rightfully so, given the terrain where you're hunting, and I don't have a lot of experience in that terrain. What was the kind of progression that you guys went through until you found like the system that like actually kind of started to produce for you?
Yeah, well, it's a really good question, right? So we've gone both ways, and we kind of found this happy medium now, right? Yeah. So it's a really good question for sure. But yeah, I mean,
well, first of all, we don't have the system.
Yeah. Okay.
Sometimes we think we do, and we're like, maybe we should revert back to that other system.
Right.
You can describe the kind of two scenarios.
The system is question everything every time, and always assess what's happening and why it's happening, and try to figure it out. I mean, if you're a hunter and a fisherman, that's how you think, right? You're like, you know, why are the elk doing this? Why are the elk not there? Why are the elk there, right? And you're always questioning what that is. But I mean, a good example is our first setup was like, we're not bringing trailers, we're not bringing campers, we're tenting it, and this is the way to do it. And so we tented up in, you know, elk country at 5,000 feet, and we're on a road, like there's lots of access, we're driving quads, but you know, we're getting up in a tent and it's -5. There's been hail and rain and shit all night.
Yep.
And we hunted probably almost harder back then.
For sure.
But you know, you weren't hunting as smart, and you were just grinding for the sake of the pain, and you didn't know how unlikely it was that you're going to kill something. So you went out every morning thinking, I'm going to just stumble across an elk right now and kill it, and that's going to be awesome. I just got to hike a little further. I just got to push a little harder. I just got to get up a little earlier. I just got to call a little more. And then you realize, like, you know, go 2 or 3 years of that and realize, like, start understanding that, like, your chances of waking up and killing elk today are 5%, right? So you'll do this for 3 or 4 years, hunting 10 days a year before you get an elk doing that, right? So you do start to get smarter. But you know, we went from a low population area with, you know, good sized elk, and definitely elk always there. And, you know, we killed an elk the first year, killed an elk the third year, didn't kill anything the fourth and fifth year. And then we were sick of hearing other people's bugles and not knowing if it was an elk or not. And it was a tight valley. You know, we had lots of little
across the valley. Like if you're up a draw, you can hear them literally across the valley, and you're like, oh no, I can hear the quad now ripping up the road. And for his next bugle, that was clearly not enough.
And almost worth mentioning, just in BC, is acoustics. And honestly, like hunting those open parkland meadows in Montana or Colorado, like acoustics are so complicated in BC, where you get on one fold and you can't hear that elk. You get on the next fold, you hear him clear as day. You get on a valley in cold, calm weather, and you can hear an elk 6 kilometers away bugling. And you get on a hotter day with you know, thermals moving and wind swirling and a bit of ambient noise in nature, and you can't hear an elk 400 yards away. And so, you know, we are in a valley where it's like you could hear an elk bugle, and it could either be, you know, 800 meters up the mountain from you, or it's across the valley on a main logging road where there's hunters hunting right now, right?
And so you still can't pinpoint it though.
And you wouldn't know just the way those echo around. You cannot pinpoint it in a lot of times, right? And we should always talk about that later, just about closing the gap, and you lose a bugle or can't hear a bugle or you don't know where it is, right? There's a lot of strategy around just where's this elk coming from? Where do we need to go to get a call? Because we lose and gain elk and just out of acoustics, right? Just with not hearing that bull. And where
before you make your play, like we'll make not a deal, but when this year's bow hunt, we had one elk bugle from a very faint bugle. And I was like, I think it's over here. And George thinks, I think it's over here. It's like,
yeah.
Why don't we before we spend 4 hours through treacherous shit to get to where we thought he was?
Yeah.
Let's get 2 or 3 more and like really pinpoint in like, okay, no, like we think he's here, because we've definitely lost elk that way, and we've definitely walked the opposite direction and never even got a bugle before, thinking that.
Yeah, and you don't even know if you misplaced that bull and you're calling to nothing, or you don't know if that bull went fly because he didn't give a shit and you just moved on, right? And so that acoustics part is really important, right? But anyways, we can circle back to that for sure. We did that valley hunting there with road access, hunting out tents. We did eventually evolve to campers and nicer setups, more comfortable, and started hunting a little bit smarter, right? Not just beating the shit out of our bodies for nothing, but focusing our hikes and our efforts. But we didn't like calling and hearing other elk hunters. We didn't like calling to the same elk everyone else was calling to potentially some years, and pushing the same herd that other people were trying to get on top of. So we went and looked for a place with bigger country and less hunters and around the same amount of elk. What we found was the elk were way more spaced out, and so the elk were nowhere in this area, and then they were just right up here, and then there was no elk for another 3 or 4 canyons or basins, and then there was elk over here. And so we hunted thinking, this is what we're going to excel at. We're going to be able to tell when an elk's an elk, but we ended up finding is like you were covering a lot of ground and finding very little elk. And so I think the big elk that we ended up finding were in goat country essentially. So we switched gears and we're like, we got to go backpack hunting. That's the way to kill these elk. And, it was good size elk, we figured, because, you could see 6 kilometers away, you can see tines scratching its middle of its back, right? So we're like, that's the big boys, let's go do that. And so, we did some backpack hunting that way. We killed the bull the very first year doing it. Ryan got his bull that way. Mm-hmm. A lot of fun. And, we chased that bull with bow actually first and almost got it with the bow. And then again, 2 or 3 days later, we killed it with rifle in the same basin. We hunted that same basin 2 more years, never saw another bugle 6 point.
Yeah. Didn't even see another bull the last year.
I think the last year we just saw no bulls, and it was just like, okay.
All our eggs are in one basket essentially at this point.
Yeah.
Because to hike to the next basin is pretty much unhikeable in terms of.
Yeah. So I would put, so the 2 drawbacks were, 1, the elk might not be there.
Yeah.
And 2, the elk that are there, maybe there's no legal bull. But then you're also dealing with, wind, rain, snow, and we've, 3 days in the high country can be 6 hours of hunting.
Yeah.
Right. So all your eggs, all your time is in there, and you get 6 hours of hunting. So if we do stuff like that now, it's with a purpose for one area, and you pull right back out if there's nothing happening there.
No active elk. There might be out there, but if there's nothing bugling, if you're not seeing them, there's a good chance you're not killing them.
Yeah,
for sure.
So our sweet spot now, like you say, the way we now hunt is we cover way more ground. We're very aggressive, and eyes are always glassing, and you're always bugling, and so you're just trying to locate active elk, and then you're trying to get on them as quick as possible. So that same day or that next morning or that next evening, and we kill a lot of elk that we spotted. So a lot of our elk come from, we spotted that elk, we're there the next morning, we're there that evening, and sure enough, a bull lights up and it's game on, right? And we've had a lot of elk that we didn't kill in the same circumstances where we got on them and, never got a shot, never got it in, but active elk are active elk. So if you get a bugle, you got to chase it. If you see something out in the open, it's normally a really good sign. I mean, sometimes it doesn't pan out. We chased elk up some pretty dry popcorn part valleys where there's no food, and that elk must have just been cruising, right? And you're like, that's where they are, and you hike super high, you put 2,000 or 3,000 feet on, and you cover this ground thinking we're going to get on elk, and you realize, that bull was in the rut. He was moving, he was covering ground, and that was just.
And it's crazy how far like I've seen some shit, like you see the elk here and you're like, yeah, I'll start walking towards them, and you get halfway there and then holy shit, man, like 3 basins over, and you're just like, it's only been an hour. Like how is that possible?
It was pretty funny. We had a long hunt, one of those hunts where we couldn't kill a bull. We came out, was it still bow season? Middle of the day, trailer in the back of the truck.
We're leaving bow
We're leaving bow season. We're in khaki pants and, and t-shirts and shit like that. And we're literally on the lowest road in the valley across from us.
Never think you'd see elk either.
Yeah, a place that we wouldn't even really hunt.
Yeah.
There's a 6-point bull elk standing there.
Yeah.
I come around the corner in the second vehicle, and the doors to the cargo trailer
I'm
are
blowing
open.
everything open, like getting spotting scopes out, getting gear out, like,
And Brian's like bugling, and this bull is bugling in broad daylight,
right, like
from the truck 500 yards away. And it's just so funny though. So me and Ryan went in on it, and there's no point in sending 5 guys in on one bull. So everyone else stayed back in the trucks. We hopped on a quad, closed the gap, got around, tried to do a nice setup, and setup didn't play out, but he bugled a couple of times and got some action. And so the bull's moving across the hillside. So it's like time to close the gap.
Yeah.
So me and Ryan are just like,
we see him and we're like, we're gonna close it here as he's trucking off.
Yeah. We went full crazy and just were like pushing bush, trying to chase this bull, close the gap, get him to turn around and challenge us. So we probably got 150 meters.
Well, we got right on top of where he was originally standing. We could smell where he was pissing and bugling.
For sure.
We were
For sure.
Yeah. And then we pushed up.
But when we didn't get that bull going up in close where we like knew where he was, we like pushed after the direction he was headed, and we got like 150 yards up that slope. No calls, nothing back, and we kind of like, I think our game's up right now. We got bows, right? So I mean, this jig is up, and we got back to the trucks, and they were like, everyone was watching.
They're just
like,
howling at us.
They're howling like, yeah, you guys want to go that far? This elk 2.5 kilometers around the cut into the next valley, and then we lost sight of it, and we were climbing over logs and doing all this and that, right? And they just cover ground, right? So
it's crazy. It's crazy.
Yeah.
And I think it's important to talk about the weather and how that can be like an issue. And that was a big learning for me, because, and that's the other like a BC centric issue. Like September can be terrible.
Yeah.
On both spectrums, it can be super hot or it can be super cold and rainy and shit.
100%. And going that backpack style and having no way to dry your gear, do you know what I mean? Like that can really limit your ability to hunt. And like I remember first going elk hunting in BC, and there's like all these guys in wall tents. I'm like, what are these pussies doing? Do you know what I mean? Like they're all stuck near roads, and they've got like firewood stacked up, and I'm like walking past their camp like I'm going back in. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then like I'm coming back a week later, just beat to shit. You know what I mean? And they're all sitting in the camp drinking beers by the fireplace, and it's like after a couple seasons that like I get it, man. I totally get it. Like, and especially the way BC is built. Playing the quad game or playing the horse game or playing the jet boat game and having some type of wall tent and playing more of like a base camp day hunt style, I think it's just not only is it more successful, I think it's just smarter given the terrain and given the weather at that particular time of year.
Yeah, and so I'd say that's where our sweet spot has kind of landed.
That's our game now, right?
we don't do those really low odd, really extreme hikes. Now, if we saw a really big bull or we weren't having a lot of action, absolutely. But I mean, we had a 5-point 3 days in a row in the same basin, and I mean, it was over 3,000 vertical, and there was no good access, and it was wide open where they were. So it was like, with a bow, this is gonna be tough. And there's 9 cows with 1 5-point, right?
Yeah. Did you guys post that on Instagram? Was that the ones like way up?
Yeah, way up. Yeah. Like in sheep country, essentially.
Right.
Like sure.
And we do that hike. We've done that hike, and 9 times out of 10 you're not killing that bull. So it's not like you shouldn't go after it, because you will kill that bull 1 out of 10 times. But we're further off pushing. Still good elk country. That's easier accessible, working the easy elk trails, doing like a 1,000.
Still for that big hike, we're gonna do it together too, right?
So, you don't want to kill that by yourself and have to deal with it. So you're taking at least 2 guys with you, and so now 2 people are tied up in this one play, and thermals hit and send some air up to them, they're gone, and the whole hike was worthless. And that can happen in 5 minutes of unexpected swirls, and your winds blows them out, right? So you can't control that every time, right? But our sweet spot now is lap of luxury. Sleep in a trailer, sleep in a cot, sleep on something comfortable, eat big meals, relax midday when it's too hot and nothing's going on, and you can back out easy enough, but put a lot of miles on in those morning and evening hunts. And if you're in a good area that, kind of sets you up at like kind of elky elevation where you're on trails, you're on fresh sign, just work it, right? You can work that midday, and thermals are hopefully in your favor, and do maybe a little less calling, but stay above where the elk might be bedded, right? They're in the thicker stuff, maybe a little bit below you. But yeah, we'll do one of those every couple of days where we stay out all day, but generally work the morning really hard, come back, relax, right? Catch a nap every few days when you're back at camp, but recharge, dry out, fresh up the socks, all that. And then, we put on more miles that way for sure, because you do 1,000 plus every morning and 1,000 plus every evening. And sometimes it's 2,000 feet and you're doing that up and down, and, you're zigzagging all the way because it's never linear straight up the mountain. It's, up and down across the valley, across another valley. So cover as much country as you can, find an active bull, work it. If the wind's good, work it to death. If the wind's bad and things are getting really wonky, then, that's a play for again, that night or the next morning, right?
So, and I want to be cognizant of time here. So let's talk about one more issue, and then we got some other questions that I want to dive into. Let's talk calling, because I think there's there's a pretty prominent theory about out calling that like most of the bigger guys kind of embrace. So like, where are you guys at with the whole location followed up by a challenge bugle? Do you guys bring in cow sounds? Like, what do you find works for you, and what kind of calls? Like, are you guys using? Are you on mouth reads, bite and blows? Like, what kind of stuff are you having success with?
So Ryan mastered the original thing, which was just call once, get a bull going, and just keep closing the gap and keep calling and keep closing the gap and keep calling and keep closing the gap, keep calling. And those are harder setups because the bull is standoffish by the time you get in there.
Yeah.
But, in those days, Ryan would just imitate the bull and eventually piss it off enough and just, we might be there for 15, 20, 30 minutes and going there. But, if you're in that steep country, a lot of time you're pushing that bull up. And so ideally, we do follow some of those methodologies of, locate one, that's just one part of it. And you don't have to do anything more than that. And now it's like, close the gap, do a setup and all that, and try to get the bull in.
Yeah, it just depends on the situation though. Like Jordon and I use completely different calls, and Jordon's bugle has a higher percentage of getting a bugle back for sure. Like there's no arguing that. Where mine seems to just tweak a bull, like the odd bull, like he loses his mind from my squealy bugle for some reason, and that's why I can do that, like challenge him, because he's already coming in.
Right.
A lot of elk with my bugle, with him just coming right in. Like Jordon's first bull, big 6-point crash right through. It would have been the perfect bull, but
yeah, we didn't have bows.
Fortunately, it was rifle season, and that's what it was. But no. And then in terms of cow calls, like I use a lot of cow calls, to be honest. Like, sometimes I'll use a bugle to get a response, and then I'll try to hike in quietly to him, and then start with cow calls, and then my bugle will essentially be my last resort at that point, unless he's fired up.
Yeah, I mean,
bugling right at him.
And I think we're kind of more or less on the same page for that one. Like to me, we'll still use bugles because you can just ring a bell, a lot further than you can, get the cow call to get them to answer. So I typically do like a couple of cow calls, nothing, just get some close, big bugle, nothing, big bugle again. And then just work, cover more ground, do it all over again. If we get a call,
if you get a call with the cow call, we just stay with it.
Yeah.
Until he's not showing interest in it.
Yeah.
Like a nice bull Jordon calling for me was all cow calls. We knew he was there. Instantly lit up from the cow call, headed towards him. Another cow call, he was like, half as close. So he was like moving in. We never ever used a bugle until like he circled below us and Jordon wanted to stop when he just ripped a challenge bugle right out.
Yeah, I know. So the way I look at it is it's kind of like having a card in your back pocket. If you haven't had the bugle, it's a really nice little card to play. It gets you out a lot of shit sometimes and can kind of be that last minute scramble where that's the deal between getting a shot or the bull's already going the wrong direction.
And that's exactly what happened. Like he circled us. He was kind of starting to head out of the country, and then all of a sudden Jordon ripped a big bugle. He came like running back, and then it was like a 20-yard shot.
Yeah. So we actually got the ID on him as he was trying to truck off, and we thought he was below us, and he'd circled the other way, and we kind of busted him. And then I was just, Hail Mary.
You're not going to lose anything at that point anyways.
100%, right? Exactly. And we'd already got the ID as he's trucking away. I screamed at him, and then the bull just kind of was like,
he went almost bonkers. It's like that typical, like eyes rolled back, like he didn't know what to do. So he's like turned around, kind of walking towards us.
Yeah. And Ryan was already,
I was already ready to go and
20 yards away at that point.
Yeah.
But yeah, so sorry. Yeah. So that's kind of the plan. If you can keep a bugle out of it, great. But I mean, I'll try a couple times in the way closing in to see if cow calls will keep them going. And if they're not, I eventually ditch them, because if the bugle's the only thing that he keeps responding to, it's bugle, right? That's the way that one's going to roll out for you, right? But yeah, I think the other technique is, locate and then set up. Very tough to do in BC. Again, off that acoustics, like guess 400 yards in really thick foliage, right? Like guess where that bull is. Good luck. And when me and Ryan went on that first bull of our bow hunt, I think I said at the end of it, I think I bugled 40 times in that bull. I got 8 calls back. Right. And we had to close over 2 kilometers.
And 5 of them were within like 100 yards, like when he was actually coming in.
Yeah. So we spent an hour and a half to 2 hours trying to pinpoint where this bull was. And it was midday. We were above him and we assumed he was bedded. And that's probably what happened, right? We ended up just basically going in on his bed, got close enough, they'd finally turn around. But we did that location, tried to pinpoint, decided, hey, that's probably him right in there. Let's just go drop through this slide right here and we'll just go straight at him. And, ideally we would have snuck all the way in, but you couldn't. You're in so much thick stuff. You're going to blow him out. And to me, it's not worth blowing him out just to get that perfect setup where they can't hear you. But and then kind of trigger calling sequence, once you're 50 or 80 or 90 yards away, we're normally still calling a lot of time just to kind of like, okay, reset. Okay, he's there. And then, okay, maybe now I can go silent and close that last 50 or 100 yards and then really fire him up. But, it's a bit of both. Sometimes you call the whole way in. Other times you call and kind of locate and tell and then close the gap and do a setup on him, right?
See, and I think this is the theme of this for me, and I'm learning tons, but I also think because of the density of the vegetation, and there's 2 things that are going on. One, in more open areas, it's way easier to like pinpoint, go silent, sneak in. Because what people need to understand about a challenge bugle is a challenge bugle only works when you're close enough for that bull to feel threatened. Yeah. Otherwise, if you're too far away, that bull's just going to keep pace with you, and you're going to keep calling, and he's going to keep moving. Yeah. And I'm almost wondering it too, because the density of vegetation, if that proximity of their bedroom is not just a little bit smaller. Like I would argue in a place like New Mexico, I think if you're inside 150, you're probably going to feel threatened because there's not a whole lot of cover between you and him. So you're probably going to get to fire him up. I bet you in BC it's closer to 50 or 75.
Oh, yeah, 50.
You've got to make a lot of noise and go through a lot of garbage when you're still back out at 150. I kind of think he probably doesn't care nearly as much about you until you really got, and I don't know how you're going to get in there silent off of one location. So I think that's the challenge with that kind of classic location challenge set up.
So I think those, and the way I put it is I think those are great techniques. Those are great approaches, but that goes out the window because terrain takes over. And so I say terrain trumps any kind of, knowledge over the line south of us that would say, do this, do that. It's like terrain's going to trump that. And that was clear we've killed so many bulls like that where nothing, and then you're right there and all of a sudden, okay, now it's on, right? And that's the game changer, is that last bit of proximity and the thick stuff. And I think you're right though, like I view it as like, they want to see an elk or smell an elk. They can hear an elk and they know that, but they just want to confirm one other thing, see or smell. And when they can see a long ways, they want to go take a look. So if they can see 100 yards at a time and you're in open country down south, it's like, they can go take a 50-yard walk and have a look. And then your setup works out perfectly because your shooter's 50 yards in front of you. But in BC, they can't see, right? So they're not going to stand up and come running towards you in that thick, nasty stuff. They're going to wait till you're right there where they know they can take a couple steps and see you across this gully or whatever, right?
And I don't think most people understand how important that visual confirmation is for an elk. Like that's everything to them.
Yeah. And we've had cows or bulls that just disappear if you're not aggressive enough and you're too far away, and they step out and they step around a corner on a road that you're calling on and they don't see an elk. Yeah, they're not interested. Okay, I heard an elk, I didn't see one. So they just wander around and they might not have made you or smelled you or anything like that. They just decide, well, no elk there. This is messed up, right? So they walk away. And we had that with Bo. I tried to do like a setup and I was like, you know what? We've had a lot of bulls in close already and haven't had any shots. I was like, let's use a landing in this regen cut and see if we can get the bull to come in. He's really low. He seems really fired up off some cow calls. I was like, this bull might come right in. And so I get a shooter set up with the bow. I back out, try to work the wind, do a call. The bull walks out broadside in the clear cut, looks 200 yards down, doesn't see an elk, walks back in the slide. And then we chased that bull and never gave us another chance. So he, our right play there was close that gap right away, which, has its challenges too, because sometimes you close that gap too quick,
and they don't even call back. They just wait and watch for you. And all of a sudden you like look, and there's an elk like 30 yards right in front of you, just staring at you. You're like,
so there's lots of gambling in BC, right? There's a lot of like woulda, coulda, shouldas, and you're just not going to kill every elk, and you're just, got to put yourself in those situations, and one after another, you eventually get one that pays off and fills the freezer.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think that's it. It is the persistent, like recognizing you guys have put in 15, 16 years, kind of built up several different areas where you had like local knowledge. Like that's what it takes to be successful in BC, man. Like and I've had a lot of failure in BC, and I've had a couple of good successes in BC, and it's like just going to an area cold is a very hard thing to do in British Columbia for any animal here. Like it's just people, I don't know where people get this. Like, don't get me wrong, I think we live in one of the best places in the world for hunting with our opportunity, the number of species you can go after. Like our densities of populations are particularly low compared to a lot of other places, and our terrain is very difficult. And rocking up to a place completely cold is a very low success proposition in British Columbia. And I think it's that repeating, committing to an area, being willing to have a couple of years of failure until you figure out like what's going to work in that particular area, I think is a big takeaway for me, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, another thing is, follow sign and follow trails. Like we used to push a lot of bush of like really arduous, and sometimes you break into elk country, but like you can hunt a lot more country if you just follow trails. And you might want to go that way, but like the trail goes that way. It's like take that one, and there might be another way to get to that location you want to get to. But you can cover a lot of ground, and you stay on elk trails is super helpful, right? Because it's just like you get into a foreign area and you just think, I just need to get into this little basin or this little gully. It looked really elky, and you just push, and I did another one of those this trip, and I just pushed, probably 2,000 feet vertical. I was probably 6 hours of hiking, maybe 8 by the time we were back. And, we weren't on a fresh elk track the whole time. And I just kept thinking we're going to break through to the mother lode. Right. But you know what? But what you learned, I mean, that's a valley we know. But what you learned was like, the elk actually don't go higher than this in the mountain. They stay in this little area here. And this stuff just doesn't get used, right? It's not their hidey hole, right? So it doesn't always help just pushing a ton of bush, but understanding the elevation they're at, understanding, the areas that they're frequently at, and they're not in the same areas every year, but sometimes some areas they're always there. So you can kind of count on that, but definitely a couple of years in the same area builds a lot more kind of competency, right? And able to deliver, because you just can hit those primo spots over and over and find one that's producing elk that year or has active, herd intervals in it.
Those years too that you don't have success, you always have, well, not always, but you usually or typically have a close call or a close encounter where you look back and go, okay, I learned something from that. Like I can take this from that and be like, what made me successful that day? And then you can apply that to another place in the area. And if you start to get places that are having the same results per se, like I'm getting closer to an elk, I'm getting a bugle, you start to learn just from being in the moment, being there, right? Like, and you start to gather information off that. If you don't start getting that, then maybe it's time to move your spots. Maybe you got to move to something different, right? Like just really be in tune with what's happening around you and how the day went, and just try to put that in other areas and see if you can get results from it.
Yeah.
Kind of how I look at it for the people that don't have success. Like we haven't had success for many years, but we always would have close encounters. We'd always have, if I just did this, we would have got elk, and then you apply that next. And
I mean, I think we maybe touched on like persistence in like in the lower population areas, like find some sign or get out bugle. Mm-hmm. Man, sometimes that was the only thread you're holding on to. And we went back 3, 4, 5 times, 6 times into the same basin over and over and over, and then finally we killed a 6 point in there. It was just like that was what we had, and we just kept working it. And yes, we kept looking for somewhere else, and then nothing, we go back in. Try, go back in, right? And so you're looking for other options, but then just persistent in that one area, because if elk do a little loop and they do a lap and they funnel back in, it's like, or they just sometimes it's just like there's elk there but there's no hot cows, and they don't want to bugle, right? And it's just like then one hot cow walks to that valley and there's 3 bulls bugling or 2 bulls bugling the very next time you go in there, right?
That's a great insight, man. That's the other thing. Just because you don't hear them doesn't mean they're
so
there. And then same breath, but if they won't talk to you, sometimes it's not worth playing them either.
So it's like, so we don't belabor a place that isn't bugling, but we'll check back in on it if there's not a better play. So that's one of those things, right? They'll fire up when a hot cow comes in, but it's like we're not going to keep going there if they're not bugling the first time, to say they're there. That's the only thing to do. Just keep going, but we will check back in. If 2 days go by, we got no other plays. Well, there was lots of sign. Let's go back in there and, maybe something's turned up and maybe a cow's come in or maybe some more bulls have fired up the rest of the bulls or whatever. Right.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So we could talk elk hunting all night, and hopefully
For sure.
we get that going, because we haven't even touched on mule deer, and we're not gonna. Talk to me about the BC Backcountry Instagram channel, because I think you guys do that with a lot of integrity compared to like some of the kind of garbage that's floating around these days. So like, how did that come about? And is that intentional? Like, did you guys have like, listen, this is how we want to do this, or is it more just like a natural evolution of that's just how you guys express yourself, and you've recognized that it's this thing and we do it over here, and that's just what it's going to be?
Yeah, I think it's more of that. It's natural. Like we like our footage to be raw. We like when Jordan's hiking up the thing and you can tell it's Jordan's hunt and you can tell it's mine. We get to share our stories, have a little banter with one another. Like we want to be the alpha male in camp and do this and that. We like to share, and we get a lot of good positive feedback from it.
Yeah.
A lot of like people being like, oh, this is very authentic, and they really like what we put out. So we've kind of just tended to stay with that. And
I'd say like our roots literally when we started this was I was seeing what was going on in Instagram and over the line, and I was like, oh my God, this is insane. Look at all this content of stuff. And we had before content was a word, right?
Yeah. But we had a plethora of content though from just previous hunts. We never had an Instagram, right? So we're like,
but I mean, our thing was like, it was just like, man, I love this stuff, but it's just not BC. And it just like, I would love to see guys in BC doing this. And I was like, and you looked on Instagram, there was nothing, right? Like, it was hunting BC, right? And that was where you went. And, it was a great place to read stories, a great place to see a couple of good animals and all that. But like Instagram was just, obviously this ultimate, avenue to be able to share way more stories, way more content, and kind of focus in on what you wanted to see, right? And it kind of was an interesting platform. So when we started it, we basically was like, man, there's so much happening over the line. There's hardly anything happening here. Let's just share stories. Let's just try to reach out to that BC super raw stuff that's relative to us that we would want to see. So I put out and Ryan puts out, and we kind of tell stories that we would want to read about adventures that we want to do in places that we would want to go. And we keep it that way, right? As we always thought behind us, at some point, if we could market this and turn it into something, that'd be great. But that wasn't the reason to do it. I think a lot of people want to be famous and have, just be that fame thing, and
it's definitely the furthest from us.
I mean, honestly, as everyone wants that a little bit, but it's just one of those things. Like I've got, I like hunting. I'd rather hunt more than just have fame or have a following. And so I think, we're not hung up on, let's focus on this. This is everything to us, and we got to build more, and we got to do this and that. We wanted to build a following. We wanted to share stories. We wanted to, at the end of the day, inspire if we can, but connect with people, and that's what it's done for us. Is
made a lot of connections.
I've how many guys I talk shop with about deer hunting and big bucks and stuff, and it's like never make that connection without social media, never make that without Instagram and sharing a story yourself and somebody reaching out, right? So it's been super cool to do that for sure. But
I scrolled back and we were talking about trail cams in 2017.
Yeah,
you had posted something and I sent you a message about, oh, where you guys at? And I had some cams up on Chilliwack, and we just, I concur, man, the amount of connections
that's what we're talking about. Like, we have thousands of those, right?
Like
people reaching out being like, we just love the BC content. And then we just chat people up and they go, oh, we're going out this weekend. Good luck to you. They say good luck to us. And we exchange some pictures sometimes at the end, and that's about it. It's just a good way to reach out to people.
Well, and you just, it's just like, it's so cool learning from somebody else that's doing it, and they're doing a little different, right? And they've got this technique, they've got this, and those guys running 100 cams, you're like, unreal, right? So how are you doing that, right? What's that all about, right? What kind of range are you working? What are you doing, right? How do you set them up, right? So, just like sharing knowledge and growing that tribal kind of awareness of what's going on and how people are getting it done, right? And
it's actually surprising a lot of people off the ground. Like they have an account, but they have 0 pictures up, and they'll like reach out to us, be like, "This is what I got last year. I just like to keep it off." And it's like, wow, the amount of content that does like privately get shared with us is pretty.
That's just cool, right? For sure.
Dude, there's some absolute killers in British Columbia, and I would say like the vast majority of them are nowhere near social media, and some of these 100%. Animals that are going down that never see the light of day, and like all these other people are getting like recognition over these like kind of like like typically unimpressive kind of animals. And it's like, it's funny that, there's this like homegrown attitude for most of the, like, especially the old timers, but even the guys, like I'm 43, even the guys like my age and a little bit younger that just don't give a shit, man, but they are absolute killers.
People reach out, and like a lot of people reach out, like, oh, you guys are experts at this. You guys are, I'm like, if you only knew the people we talked to, those are the real guys. We're having some success. We're figuring a lot of stuff out, and we're having a lot of fun doing it, right? But I mean, holy crap, there's some guys out there that just are on another level, right?
Like sending us every year, like mature, big bulls, and we're like, cool, good for you.
Yeah, man. Well, the dad of my buddy who I just went sheep hunting with, I think he has 13 stones.
Right.
And like the guy doesn't, like, they're laying in the shed. Do you know what I mean? Like doesn't even, I don't want to say he doesn't give a shit. He respects the animals that he's taking, but it's just like, that's not what it's about for him. Like they're not hung up, they're not mounted, they're not like nothing, man. Like it's just, he wanted the experience and he went out and he did it, and it's like very important, but it's like
conquer the mountains, took something home. It's for sure.
Yeah,
for sure.
It's crazy. Okay, I don't want to keep you guys forever. I know you got a big hunt. Are you cool with let's hit up some Instagram questions to close out?
For sure. Sounds good. Absolutely.
Okay. And we'll keep them. We'll try and kind of keep brief. All right. Okay. I'm gonna leave out the mule deer ones because secretly I'm gonna get you guys to come back on and talk mule deer. We'll do that maybe after mule deer season, when hopefully we both have some good mule deer stories to share, and we can talk mule deer hunting strategies. So for anybody who asks mule deer questions, I'll save them and we'll get into them with the boys later on in the season. Jordon, and this is I actually want your opinion on this term, and I want you to answer this question. Would you consider yourself a trophy hunter?
Yeah, so I mean, defining trophies a big thing, right? So the way I would say that is, like, if it comes to mule deer, for sure. But how I would describe why is, I can afford to put enough time in the woods. I want to experience something cool. I want to push the limits, and I know that killing a young deer isn't gonna do that for me. And to be, the way I'd relate it in the sports world is like, if you could go play against, 6-year-olds on the soccer field, would that be fun? And it's like, no, you're so much bigger, so much stronger, so much tougher. So I kind of relate that in the woods. If you can go to these places and you have the research done, and you can push the amount of days in the woods to wait out for seeing a bigger deer and track down an older class animal, with good genetics would be a bonus, obviously, right? Then absolutely, I think it just riches in the experience. And at the end of the day, older, mature animal, there's 100% more meat, so that's always a bonus. But definitely okay going home without the meat. If I've got meat in the freezer, I get a little more trigger happy if there's no meat in the freezer. But generally, you get an elk or so in the fridge between a few of us. I'm happy to go home without punching a tag. Go a couple of years and I start to get pretty itchy and wanting to connect with something bigger. But yeah, I would say, call it trophy, call it whatever you want to. Like, am I willing to wait and put in more days and hike right to the end of the season to kill an older, bigger deer? 100%. Is it purely?
I love it.
Yeah, purely score related? No, like definitely not. Score is cool. It's a really good way to honor the animal and classify the animal. But like, I mean, old deer, man.
I'm on this push, man. I want to reclaim that word. I'm sick of giving shit up to like the anti-hunters because it's like try not to.
So I'm okay. I'm okay with the word trophy, right? It's just
but you got to qualify it these days, because it's like, no, I don't care how many inches are on my wall. I always like to say, like, I've gotten to a point where I want to pit myself against the oldest, wiliest, hardest to kill animal, because that's who I want to battle. And I don't want the 6-year-old on the soccer field. And yes, I want a piece of memorabilia from that, because it was a battle well fought, and I want to respect him. I want to respect me and the effort I put in, and everything else in our life, we call that a trophy. You come home from a
I don't think there's any shame in it at the end of the day, right? It's just just how people like to use it and classify a certain type of hunting as that is just not necessarily respectable what it can be or is for a lot of people, right?
100%. Love it. Okay, next up is Ryan. Who is a better elk hunter in the most raw sense, you or Jordon?
Oh yeah, that's a good one.
Is this still one of Jordan's buddies? He put them up too.
His Instagram handle is Burka8.
Oh yeah, definitely is right. Yeah. I knew it might have been someone like Burke. Yeah.
Nice.
Defining raw so many different ways. I don't know. I think we both, like we've touched on, we both have our battles that we won that Jordan can do that I can do that Jordan can't. So I'm just gonna keep it at that for now.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
Yeah.
I love it. Okay, how do you guys identify areas that, like, several times in the podcast you talked about, okay, we had an area and for whatever reason we didn't really like that area. How do you go identify a different area that you want to go check out? Is it e-scouting? Like, what's your process for that?
Yeah.
A lot of Google Earth.
Yeah, I mean, I'm notorious for it. I don't have as much time nowadays as I used to. I could just stare at Google Earth for hours and get excited about this. And I think that's more the adventurer in you that says, "Oh, I need to hike in there. I need to check that out." Right. But we do a lot of e-scouting. We tend to have our beliefs that are like, elk like a lot of wet areas, elk like
north slopes.
A lot of north slopes
in BC
that do have some open country close to it where they can migrate back and forth. So we definitely do a lot of e-scouting. We look at harvest stats. We'll do that kind of big picture, small picture stuff. We kind of look at the numbers, where stuff's getting harvested, where the populations seem bigger, and there's lots of stuff, from the biologist if you want to dig deep and look. And I've researched hunts that are low population, and biologists have just told me, I've called them and say, what about this? And biologists have been like, yeah, good luck in there. Like one elk gets killed in there every 20 years, so don't bother, right? And you're like, okay, right. Yeah. So maybe that's the wrong play, maybe something a little higher population than that. But you can go down those avenues. I've done a bit of calling to biologists. We've done a bit of research on harvest stats, and then you do the e-scouting and boots on the ground, and just bullshitting with people where they see elk, where they see deer, where you've come across it yourself, and you say that's worth poking around and taking a look, right?
Even new little areas within your area. So like we might go way more north or east, and we might just turn around, like we said, midday, and all of a sudden there's a herd of elk on a mountain we've never hunted before. Yeah. As soon as you see a herd, it's like there's some intel right there. You go, and sure enough, it's a new area that's
boots on the ground and glasses on the slopes, right? I mean, glass is always up. Like, I think a lot of people will just hike around and they get tired, and it's hard to keep focused. But I mean, you're grabbing a bit of water, grabbing something to eat, binoculars up, man. Our binoculars do not stop scanning because you're just looking for the next spot. They're going to find some animals, right?
What do you guys like for binos? And again, I'm curious. I'd be also curious about like brand and whatnot, but also like magnification, because if you're in the timber, but then you're also doing kind of distance glassing, that's a tricky problem to solve.
It is, yeah, and we're both rocking Vortex razors. I've got like first or second gen, and Ryan's probably got third or fourth gen. So his are actually nicer than mine, and you can tell the difference in the new ones. Mine are fantastic, but I think whatever first gen was, it's probably 12 years old, 13, 14 years old. I don't know what it is now.
Mine's probably 5 or 6.
And they both 10x42.
But 10x42.
Yeah.
You still want that magnification. So if you do see an elk, you like further away, you can be like, oh, there's a bull there. You can see a little bit of time, right? Where I think the payoff's worth it to have like a lower magnification and tight, because you don't really need your glasses in that tight.
You're the amount of times you've glassed now, like when you bring rockers up, they're looking at what you're looking at, right? You're not worried about being too zoomed. You're like, oh, I can't see. It's like binoculars up, you're looking at what you're looking at, right?
If you're bringing binoculars up, it's 100 meters further for the most part, so you can get to see.
And the one thing is, like, we don't identify a lot of animals that we get in on. Like when it's elk, if you see 2 or 3, it's like just right away, if you see a huge one beside a smaller one, you're like, okay, that's probably a bull just watching that cow. And my biggest bull to date was that situation. I was hiking after an active elk, and like literally we just kept spotting for like an hour, and like one elk just fed nonstop in the slide, and the other one just sat there and stared at it. Like it looked like a decoy way up the mountain. I'm like, that's just got to be a big bull watching. And sure enough, it was a hot cow with a single bull, and there was no other elk in the area. And, we ended up killing that bull, but it's just like, had me not watched that thing from 6 Ks away through 10x42s and just said, that one's bigger, it's got to be a bull. That's a good lead, chase that lead down, and maybe it pans out, maybe it doesn't, but it's definitely a good one if there's something obvious like that, right? So a lot of the time we're not making 6 points on elk before we go in.
You get the odd shine in the antler,
right?
With the binoculars, but like still nice to have that magnification across that big valley to at least.
I'm a big butterfly effect guy when it comes to elk hunting. Like, chase every lead and you don't know what it turns into. We almost killed the bull last year, the year before. That we spotted elk middle of the day, coming back from hunt exhausted. And, those elk end up coming on another slope that we spotted them on again and then made a play on them. Ryan was on that play, no sign of elk, didn't get a call back. We knew it was a 6 point in that case because we got the spotter on it. But from there, they spotted a massive bull in a slide. You can't glass from anywhere.
Yeah.
So I mean, you don't go hike a mountain 3,000 vertical because you want to spot another slide, right? It doesn't make sense, right? But get on that play, keep your glass up, and next thing you know, we're on a full herd of elk the next day. We were calling from above, calling from below, got on a big 6 point, couldn't get a good shot, and full walked, right? But that play only came because of that butterfly effect of going after that one, spotting the next one, and then your next play is ready to go, right? And elk wouldn't even know we're there.
Yeah. Awesome. Let's wrap things up. Is there anything I didn't ask that you guys want to talk about? Anything you want to throw out there or plug or yeah, I'll leave it up to you guys. Anything you want to close out with or?
Yeah, no plugs from us, right? But I don't know, like happy to do this for sure, man. It's been a blast. And it's kind of cool answering questions and whatnot. I think, elk in BC for people, like every 6 points, a trophy, right? So
yeah.
So like you said, man, these aren't easy elk. So if people are killing, squeaker 6, we kill a lot of squeaker 6s, right? And so to me, man, a 6 point elk in BC is so cool. And if you can get it done, man, that's don't expect to get that every year. Don't expect to smash elk nonstop, right? We put a lot of time in and we're getting a few elk here and there, but it's not a common thing, right? And the stats don't show that either, right? So don't stack up against the southern hunters that can kill 2 or 3 bulls with a few different tags in a few different areas, and have a good year hunting. I mean, that's not what we're up against here, right? So
no, I think that's a great message to close out on, because it's just a comparison that you're never going to win.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks so much, lads. Really appreciate it. For everybody listening or watching, again, it's BC Backcountry, all one word. You follow them on Instagram. Highly recommend it. Awesome content. Thanks again, lads, for doing this, and thanks for tuning in.